The Fifth Circuit's green light. A critical look at the impending execution of Jessie Hoffman. Is justice truly served when the method of execution is shrouded in controversy and potential cruelty? The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals has just given Louisiana the go-ahead to execute Jessie Hoffman, a decision that demands a closer, more critical examination. Give a like and subscribe. Leave a comment. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals has overturned a lower court's block, paving the way for Louisiana to execute Jessie Hoffman. This ruling allows the state to proceed with its plan to use nitrogen hypoxia, a method shrouded in uncertainty. Hoffman was convicted of the horrific 1996 kidnapping, rape, and murder of Mary Molly Elliot. Attorney General Liz Murrell's office has celebrated the ruling as a victory for justice. But is it truly justice when the very method of delivering it is under intense scrutiny and raises serious ethical questions? This case forces us to confront the uncomfortable realities of capital punishment. Jessie Hoffman is scheduled for execution on Tuesday, March 18th. The state plans to use Louisiana's newly approved method of nitrogen hypoxia. This method, intended to induce death through oxygen deprivation, has become the focal point of a fierce legal battle. Hoffman argues that nitrogen hypoxia constitutes cruel and unusual punishment, a violation of the Eighth Amendment. He also claims that it infringes upon his religious freedom as a Buddhist. These are not mere legal technicalities, they are fundamental rights at stake. Hoffman contends that gassing would cause excessive pain and suffering, a claim supported by expert testimony. Furthermore, he argues that the inability to practice breathing meditation, a core tenet of his Buddhist faith, violates his religious rights. This raises profound questions about the state's responsibility to accommodate religious practices, even in the context of capital punishment. The Fifth Circuit criticized the lower court's interpretation of the Constitution, arguing that the Eighth Amendment does not mandate Louisiana to adopt a more painful method. This argument seems to sidestep the central issue, whether nitrogen hypoxia itself constitutes cruel and unusual punishment. The court's reasoning feels like a convenient justification for a potentially inhumane practice. The court argued against forcing Louisiana to use a firing squad over nitrogen hypoxia. This comparison is a red herring, distracting from the real concerns about the untested and potentially agonizing nature of nitrogen hypoxia. The court's decision appears to prioritize expediency over a thorough examination of the ethical implications. The Fifth Circuit deemed the lower court's decision contrary to Supreme Court precedent. But is blindly adhering to precedent always the right course, especially when new evidence and concerns about the method of execution are emerging? This decision raises serious questions about the court's willingness to critically evaluate the constitutionality of nitrogen hypoxia. Cecilia Capel, Hoffman's attorney, has expressed strong disagreement with the Fifth Circuit's ruling. She argues that the court should have deferred to the lower court's assessment of evidence, which suggested the nitrogen gas protocol would cause a prolonged and torturous death. Capel's concerns highlight the potential for immense suffering, a possibility that the Fifth Circuit seems to have dismissed too readily. Capel points out the recent implementation of the protocol and the late public release of its details. This lack of transparency raises serious concerns about the state's commitment to ensuring a humane execution. The rushed implementation and limited public scrutiny suggest a disregard for due process. Capel argues for a thorough adjudication of its constitutionality before execution. She also points to concerns raised by a federal court in Alabama regarding their nitrogen gas protocol. These concerns, coupled with the lack of transparency, paint a disturbing picture of a state rushing to implement a potentially flawed and inhumane method of execution. Capel has announced plans to immediately appeal to the Supreme Court, seeking a stay of execution. This is a crucial step in ensuring that Hoffman's rights are protected and that the constitutionality of nitrogen hypoxia is thoroughly examined. The Supreme Court's intervention is essential to prevent a potentially irreversible injustice. The appeal aims to protect Hoffman's religious freedom and prevent what Capel describes as torture. This is not just about one man's fate. It's about upholding the principles of justice, fairness, and human dignity. The Supreme Court's decision will have far-reaching implications for the future of capital punishment in the United States. The use of nitrogen hypoxia as a method of execution is fraught with ethical concerns. The lack of extensive research and the potential for prolonged suffering raise serious questions about its constitutionality. Is it truly humane to subject someone to a method of execution that is largely untested and potentially agonizing? The argument that nitrogen hypoxia is less painful than other methods of execution is based on limited evidence and speculation. The potential for panic, suffocation, and other forms of distress cannot be dismissed. The state's responsibility is to ensure a humane execution, not to experiment with potentially cruel and unusual methods. The secrecy surrounding the development and implementation of nitrogen hypoxia protocols is deeply troubling. The public has a right to know how the state plans to carry out executions, especially when those methods are shrouded in controversy. Transparency is essential to ensuring accountability and preventing abuses of power. The case of Jessie Hoffman highlights the broader problems with capital punishment in the United States. The death penalty is often applied unfairly, with racial and socioeconomic disparities playing a significant role. The risk of executing innocent people is also a persistent concern. The focus on the method of execution often distracts from the more fundamental questions about the morality and effectiveness of capital punishment. Is the death penalty truly a deterrent to crime? Does it provide closure for victims' families? These are questions that deserve serious consideration. The international community has largely rejected capital punishment, viewing it as a violation of human rights. The United States stands as an outlier, clinging to a practice that is increasingly seen as barbaric and inhumane. It's time for a national conversation about the future of capital punishment in America. Public opinion plays a crucial role in shaping the debate over capital punishment. Informed and engaged citizens can influence policy and demand greater accountability from their elected officials. It's essential to stay informed about the issues and to make your voice heard. Activism can take many forms, from writing letters to elected officials to participating in protests and demonstrations. Supporting organizations that advocate for criminal justice reform is another way to make a difference. Every action, no matter how small, can contribute to a more just and humane society. The case of Jessie Hoffman is a stark reminder of the human cost of capital punishment. It's a call to action to demand greater transparency, accountability, and a more critical examination of the ethical implications of state-sanctioned executions. The impending execution of Jessie Hoffman demands our attention and critical engagement. The Fifth Circuit's decision raises serious questions about the constitutionality of nitrogen hypoxia and the state's commitment to humane execution practices. We cannot stand idly by while potentially cruel and unusual punishments are carried out in our name. Take action now. Contact your elected officials and demand a moratorium on executions using nitrogen hypoxia. Support organizations working to abolish the death penalty and promote criminal justice reform. Share this video to raise awareness and spark a national conversation about the future of capital punishment in America. Let your voice be heard and help ensure that justice is truly served.